Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Middle-earth for Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. And today we are continuing our series of casual strolls through Gondor, basically. The last bits of Gondor that we have to do before we start heading into Mordor, or towards Mordor anyways. So for those of you that are joining for the first time, this is a world design and level design focused stream. So in here, you'll be able to ask me all sorts of questions about what goes into making the landscape, the world, the dungeons of Lord of the Rings Online. This is not a stream to talk about things like PvMP, lag, balance issues, what new features and systems might be coming up, because I'm a world designer. That is what I focus on. But if you have any questions about those, the housing system, those sorts of things, feel free to ask me and I'll do my best to answer them for you. So today, our stream is kind of kicking off here in Minas Tirith. When we last kind of left off, I had kind of left us off at Osgiliath, and now we're going to continue here into Minas Tirith before doing a quick hop over to Far Anorien and starting our path through there. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I kind of took the month off after we launched beneath the surface. Let me bump up my run speed a little bit. So one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of come here and start in Minas Tirith. One, we haven't really looked at Minas Tirith as part of these streams before. I think we might have done something with like a midsummer preview. I think, but that was a long time ago. One of the reasons to come here to Minas Tirith is, we very recently introduced what we call server pinning into the game, which allows us to isolate certain sets of land blocks and have them moved into their own sort of dedicated server cluster on our back end. And through our research, there were kind of two areas that we discovered that really, brought down the rest of, basically the rest of the game when they started getting busy. And one of those was Minas Tirith, and one of them was the Etten Moors. So now both Minas Tirith and the Etten Moors have been sent off, pinned, as it were, to their own servers. And from our initial our initial results and feedback, that's had a difference. It may not solve all of the lag issues that players are experiencing, but the pinning has really done a good job of helping to, let me get my bearings here, has really done a good job of helping to kind of mitigate some of the egregious issues associated with players loading into these spaces. So we're excited about that. That's not to say we're done working in Minas Tirith. We've also discovered some just general issues with physics complexity, number of assets, and whatnot. So over the next few months, I'm not exactly sure when we're planning to have these have it finished, but there's going to be a lot of work done kind of in Minas Tirith and all of its various copies to kind of consolidate down a bunch of just commonly used assets. Things like, you look at how we have certain, vendor stalls and whatnot set up, and we are using the same kinds of layouts and decorations pretty regularly. And it just kind of makes sense to, instead of it being a stall with 20 additional objects attached to it, maybe we can combine that down into a single object. And the nice fun side effect of some of those changes is there's the possibility that a lot of those combined vendor stalls. So for example, you look here, we've got a blacksmith stall. And one of the things that we might do, not saying we're going to do it specifically for this, but one of the things that we might do is take this vendor stall and say there's 20 of them throughout the entirety of Minas Tirith, turn this vendor stall into a single decorative object. And then nothing's really stopping us from then going one step further and turning this decorated little thing into a housing object that can be used. So that's a nice like side benefit of the kind of performance work, particularly the physics performance and entity count performance works that we're doing in Minas Tirith. We've got a great pipeline that will help us consolidate a lot of things pretty effectively, which I'm excited about. So as I'm running around here, and let me take a look at the map again to know where I need to make my next turn. I'll take a look at some of the questions that are coming up here in chat. So one person says, it's been ages since I've been to Anorien. Always felt like a region you just don't really spend a lot of time in. And I think that's very true. Like, I think when I was doing the streams for original Gondor, a lot of the commentary that I had about it was like, you are really on the fast track to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. Like, there's not a lot of time to dawdle. There's a lot of like dire stuff going on, right? And the whole purpose and intention kind of Gondor is to, convey the urgency that is, what's going on, the impending battle at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, like setting the stage for war. And Anorien is just like another piece of that, where like you are really, your mission is to rally the Rohirrim and get them to the field. Like you saw the terrors and chaos of war on the on the ride up to Minas Tirith and through to Ithilien and whatnot. And now you're just like, okay, we need more people, and that is where Anorien comes in. Is like you've got the Rohirrim on the far side of it, and you got to get there and kind of get them going. Let's see. I'll get up to a nice viewpoint and read down through the chat again real quick. So this game needs to be translated into Spanish. Unfortunately, that's not my department. I do know that localization can be a pretty hefty task, particularly with a game as verbose as Lord of the Rings Online is. Another says, I would just like to say thank you here. Under Umbar turned out absolutely beautiful. Yeah, I'm really happy with how Umbar Mook turned out. I think we did a great job of kind of building each area so that it had its own character, but still allowing it to feel very, very connected. Very connected to each other and also connected with the landscape above it. I wanted to make sure that as we were building it, we were doing a very good job of kind of driving home that this is an extension of the city, above, and that the themes and the visuals of those locations kind of further reinforce what's going on down there. We're working our way up. I'm trying not to spend too much time here in Minas Tirith, because you all know Minas Tirith so well at this point. You know where all the turns are, all the different versions. At some point, you'll be here soon for Midsummer. So I don't want to spend too much time, but I did want to at the very least run up onto the prow. Was there ever plans to do more Minas Tirith interiors? There are a lot of spaces you can discover that just have a closed door. I think Minas Tirith already has a very substantial number of interiors. There's always this like balance to be had when it comes to designing not even just a city, but any any social center, any hub, any town, any village, where kind of there's this player impulse to want to go into every building, but then there's also the like, well, if I was someone who was living here, I would not want all of these random people just coming in. So there's always just kind of this like balance of how are we, how are we portraying a town, making it feel like a town, but also like not making it too open so that there is some like story weirdness going on with just you could walk in everywhere. There's always this whole like in my head. There was this animation I had seen years ago. It was making fun of the Legend of Zelda games where like Link would just like burst into someone's house late at night and then just start smashing vases for rupees. And the poor person that lived in there was just like sitting in their bed terrified as he's just going through destroying everything. Which always is just like kind of funny. And to some degree, like, I kind of feel like if we want to portray real characters, we shouldn't have every interior open, because not every door is a door that our player would be even allowed to open to go into, right? All right. Let me move on to our next spot, and then I will handle a few more questions. I'm a little sad that we're back to dark and gloomy, dreary. Like, Athelion was a nice break. It was nice and shiny, and now we're here, and it's glum. It makes me sad a little, but we'll be moving to forests soon with Tar Druidan, which is, forests are my jam. So here we are. We're at the North Gate now. So I do want to, like, we'll run our way up through here. We'll check in with Caer Andros, and then kind of head our way west. By the way, in case anyone has not seen me have a drink in a while, let me know, and I'll take a sip. I often talk a lot in these streams and forget to have a drink, and my voice hates me for it. So there's a comment that says, yes, I think that's a great idea regarding the consolidated assets. More detailed furniture, so you don't need 10 hooks to get a satisfying look. Yeah, and I think that's particularly something I'm going to be pushing forward now that we have this pipeline that works really well for it. And it gives me a little bit more flexibility to start going through some of those old request threads that are out there, and just like start working on creating housing items that the players have requested. Does land block pinning apply to all versions of Minas Tirith, before the battle, after the battle, Midsummer, King's Gondor? I'm not sure which specific versions. I know there was at least one version that was noted as being kind of particularly egregious, and that one has been pinned. The other ones may have as well. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not the one that did the pinning. I wish the Midsummer MT map had ramps highlighted like they are in OG and After Battle. I think that's something that we can put if you were to file a bug on it so that it stays fresh in mind, that's something that we could address. All right, and we're working our way up to, I believe this is the Krithdost, I think is what it is. I mean, I suffer too going through these areas as a player, mostly in that, from the comment before, where it's just like you kind of feel like you're being moved through quickly, so you don't have as much time to kind of linger in these areas of Gondor, in any area of Gondor probably, except for Dol Amroth. Really, you don't. The game does not really kind of encourage you to hang out here. The game wants you to, conduct your business and then get out of Dodge because there's a war going on and you gotta take care of the war. So let's see. The question about Minas Tirith. There is the curiosity of how people actually live in a city like that. We mostly see public spaces. I mean, there are a lot of buildings and whatnot that are all over the place that have doors that aren't openable, and those could easily lead to apartments, townhomes, like those sorts of things. It's certainly something that is a balance when it comes to building anything in a game. Is like how gamey do you want it to be for the sake of just focusing on the gameplay versus kind of more of a like simulation of a space. And for example, I did a revamp of Breland when I first came back and started working with SSG on Lord of the Rings. And one of the things that I really tried to do was like we had a lot of buildings, like a lot of Bree buildings embedded in the sides of mountains, mostly because the mountains were our impassables for those areas. But it didn't really entirely like feel good or make sense to me that like the inn in Combe, for example, half of it was buried in a mountain. So I tried to be thoughtful in those kind of revisions and kind of make it feel more like a purposeful building. I don't want to jump up. Whee! And I think with Umbar, with the city, that was something that we wanted to very like specifically pay attention to as well. Is not make it just all of these like big important spaces. Make it so that there are places to to think of as places people lived. And it's actually kind of funny because with update 40. There were a couple of requests for interiors with entrances to them, and it was actually kind of hard to find like good places to drop in these doors because we had a ton of content in a lot of those places, and it made it hard to really pick and choose what was going in them, and where would be a good spot for it. One person says, going to Minas Tirith was the first time I had to deal with lag in Lotro. It was still, it was and still is my least favorite place in the game. It's unfortunate to hear, considering it is such a big place. But I also think that our focus on it particularly as one of our kind of test beds for trying to improve performance means that we acknowledge that it can be a pain point. I know that there's always that balance of how do we accurately depict something based off the lore versus making it accessible for gaming, and that's why the stable masters are as present as they are in there, is to kind of help ease the traversal through the space. Question: if we ever expanded to Rune, would it be a completely different culture from Umbar, or will it be the same? Will we get new textures, outfit, landscape textures, designs? And when will we get past the brown lands and into Rune? So Rune is certainly a place that we would like to go, and we're very aware that as we approach something like Rune, and honestly like we did for Umbar as well, that there's going to be a significant need for new cultural assets. I think one of the things that was that we haven't done in such a long time when it came to building Umbar was like the amount of new structural stuff that we had to create. I think the last like big building set that was made for Lord of the Rings was the Gondorian stuff, right? And even that had some basis in the Anuminos structures, so that we were able to kind of riff off of those to build out the entirety of the Gondor set. But but I think with Umbar, we were just like, this is a whole cloth, like whole new thing for us to build, and it was a lot of work. And I think we want to make sure that as we're building out stuff like this, that you know, we represent the cultures that we're representing in Middle Earth. We don't want to lean too heavily on any one like real world culture as being the visual inspiration for what we're making, because the one Umbar is not an analog to any one civilization super specifically, and it's not heavily detailed in the lore as to what, or in the appendices as to like what specific inspirations there might have been. So we have a bit of flexibility to do what we need to make that culture shine. And we're not in our current trajectory heading to the east from Umbar. There are going to be other new cultures that we encounter as part of that. And while we are not going to likely be building quite on the same scale as we did for Umbar, there are going to be new cultural assets, new structures, new buildings, and whatnot that are going to be needed to be supported in those areas. And the same will happen for Rune. When we eventually get to Rune, we're going to need to have that same kind of cultural asset support. All right. Another question is, hello, how do you like Lotro? I like Lotro a lot. I've been working on Lotro for, most of my professional career. So I would say that it's had a strong impact on me. I personally really enjoy the opportunity to kind of play in landscape sandboxes like we have been. It's an opportunity for me to kind of flex my muscles creatively. There's a lot of variety in the kinds of things that we build. We do forests, mountains, plains, tundras, catacombs, sewers. Like there is a very considerable amount of variety in what we can build. So that really does make the experience of working on it very engaging and very different from update to update. New challenges, new things to figure out as we go along. So player asks, I know you can't give away spoilers, but is it safe to assume that the new landscape will be more of a desert? I'm guessing you're talking about what we're going to be producing for update 42 later this year. There certainly is a much more arid component to it, with new textures and new just terrain types in general, biomes in general that we haven't really represented, at least not at a large scale. I'm not going to say, I would say not to expect a full-on Saharan-style desert as part of this update, because we're still in kind of the fringe lands. We're heading into Harad, and we need to geographically transition from kind of the more lush and humid Umbar to something that's more arid and desolate and dry. I remember, so this to speak back to the stream briefly, this is an area that was built while I was away on other employment opportunities, and I always, like, whenever I play through here, this is one of the spaces that I frequently get lost in part because I didn't have a hand in building it. I think that's one of the things that, while I do not know where everything in the world is, having a hand in constructing it really does go a long ways towards your familiarity with running around in space. And I know that there are people that play the game that know way more than I do, to the point where like they could look out into a distance in unplayable area and notice if certain trees are missing, that kind of thing. We actually had a new landscape feature kind of fixed for our scene file systems, and asked our Palantir players to go just like jump into the world and take a look at certain selected areas to make sure that things didn't look terribly off, because we honestly, like, we know that some of the players know what the landscape looks like just as well as, if not better than us. I definitely get Troll Shaw's vibes running through this area. The canyons, just the deep switchbacks, the turns everywhere, the lushness of it. I think one of the things that makes this feel a little bit more successful than the Troll Shaws is I think in the Troll Shaws, you have your impassables, and you basically have your bushes, and then your impassable, and then whatever's on top of it. So you have this, chunk of cliff that you're always seeing. And this area, I think, circumvents that pretty well, by making sure that there's visually just stuff in the way, blocking your ability to just see all of the cliff, right? Whether it's roots, it's other trees popping in, growing through things or growing next to things. I think this area more successfully Troll Shaws than Troll Shaws does. I mean, Troll Shaws is a old original game region, so that it's got that kind of going against it. But yeah, no, it's definitely something I think about whenever we run through these kind of foresty areas. Is what did we do that was successful? What did we do that was not successful? Where can we take what learnings can we take from this in the future, and implement when we go into new areas? Like we did this pretty extensively when it comes to places like Moria. Moria, Gundabad. Those were all things that we, took to heart and did a lot of thinking about when it came to build Umbarmok. Like, what did we do in those areas that worked? What didn't work? What do we need to change? How do we need to change those things? All right, let's pause here and I'll go through some more of the questions. I always crack up when I listen to children laugh or cheer, like in the Yuletide Festival instance when you bring them fireworks. Are you doing voiceovers in-house or are they outsourced? Did you or any of the team do the children? They don't sound much like children, but they are still quite hilarious. So I think a lot of the voiceovers that we use for children are adults doing the voiceovers, just then they're pitched up in post, I believe. I'm not exactly certain. All of our voiceovers we do employ voiceover artists to do that voiceover work, because we want to be respectful of the organizations, the performing arts organizations that are out there. So all of our, I think very rarely a member of the dev team will do voiceover work, and that's usually a special case thing. There may be some remnants. I remember, I think it was Orion, was working really hard to get his Screen Actors Guild credentials, to be able to do more voiceovers, like back when we were launching the game. I don't remember if he actually was able to get that or not, but I've always loved the Mirkwood expansion. It's one of the best. If we ever get Middle of Mirkwood, will it be in the same scale as South Mirkwood or a little smaller in scale like North Mirkwood? Do you have any drafts on it? Will it be an expansion or a filler zone, do you think? I don't have any thoughts on future Mirkwood spaces. It's not something that's really, at least directly, on our radar at the moment. It may be something that we kind of circle back to as a launching point potentially for something like when we start heading towards Rune. But outside of that, I don't have any information or thoughts on how we might proceed filling in the middle. You know, I'm assuming you're talking about Ravanian. So here, the Narrows and East Bight area is what I would guess you're talking about, or just in general this area all here. But yeah, I'm not sure. You know, a lot of the times when we do filler zones, it is often just someone has extra cycles in their dev time, and they are able to dedicate work to it. It's just like with all of our, you know, housing neighborhoods. That kind of focus is where we lean. Back into the stream here. I was always intrigued by this quarry here. It's just such a remarkably different kind of space that just pops up out of nowhere, that you're not really expecting. And it's one of those things too. Whenever I like go to build a quarry or I need quarrying materials, I always end up finding my way back here to kind of look at how we did some things, what assets we have that I can sample. There's some stuff coming up in Update 42 that I'm certainly going to be like looking at this stuff and cribbing off of to kind of help build out some of that stuff. And then for those of you familiar with King's Gondor, you'll be familiar with these bricks that found their way down into King's Gondor. So one person says, cliffs and mountains generally look a lot better in newer regions. There's almost always some structure on it. Cliffs are actually rock walls, and not just steep terrain with textures over it. Yeah, and I think in general we try to lean into that. I think back in the old days when we first built the game, those kinds of just using the terrain as a cliff looked fine, and it worked for the era. But now as we progress, and you know, the game isn't getting any younger, but new games are always going to start looking better. And we want to try to find ways where we can, you know, add a little bit of extra fidelity here and there where we can. And that's something that jamming rocks into cliffs, like you see here, even, you know, merging those assets together, basically embedding them into the walls of the impassable cliffs, just helps to make it feel more like a real space, more like a actual terrain as opposed to a slope that's just there for the sake of being a slope. So another person says, I would love more Mordor too. I wonder if further out it will be more Greenland and native tribes. You know, those are some of the things that we've talked a bit about too, is, you know, when would we set other things that we build in, you know, where would we set things that we would build in Mordor? Like, what time frame would they be set in? Would they be set? Would we make it a Before the Shadow style expansion where it's a, you know, lower level expansion, kind of suited to the I'm just going to take some shortcuts here to get where I want to go. Would it be a lower level expansion suited to the areas around it? Kind of telling stories that coincide with the timeline of the original Mordor expansion? Would it be something where we, set it, kind of do similar to what we did with Carn-Dûm, and make the setting for it with the new Carn-Dûm instances, like make it set in modern time frame, and tell the stories of Mordor after the fall of Sauron. I think we touch a little bit on those kinds of story threads in Umbar, because Umbar was a subjugated land, and there's certainly some appeal to figuring out. Hey, kitty. Oh, there we go. Some appeal to figuring out like what these lands end up being like when the iron-fisted rule that they knew before is no longer there. And I think there's certainly some success in that and some challenges in that. People like to have clear antagonists, and it can be hard when the peoples in the areas that you're in that were previously antagonists are now like they're trying to figure out stuff on their own. Like they're trying to figure out what life means like for them. And sometimes it can be hard to approach that perspective, right? It can be hard to sympathize with those characters that previously were villains, right? These lands that you thought were once evil were like really just in the bad position of being subjugated. And now that they have their own choices, what will their choices be? What will their decisions, and what will their path be now that it's no longer ruled, right? So yeah, I think Mordor has a lot of storytelling opportunity in it, and it, I think, really has an opportunity for our quest writers to do some really creative things. Like one of the things I really enjoyed about King's Gondor was kind of a similar approach to it. Like what is King's Gondor? Oh, already in use. I'm just using my rocket boots way too fast because I want to get up here for a cool view. All right, almost there. One more boop. There we go. We're talking about like what the impact of the war had on the survivors. All right. One time in the Vales, I went down the path to Middle Mirkwood, and I got a warning in red letters stating to leave the area immediately. So depending on where you were, that may have been intentional. That may have been, oops, we missed a spot. Time to hop down. Whee! Note, I do not believe we're in playable areas right now. Though we might be, because there's mobs there. I admit I am not super familiar with this area. Alright. Let's see. I've been frequently surprised by the way the same assets are used to achieve settings that feel very different. Yeah, I think there are certainly people that I think would wish that every region we go to, we get a whole new set of assets to work with and to show off. But the reality is, we're a small team. This is a live product where we're trying to create something as regularly and as quickly as we can. And that often means that we need to be creative in how we use our assets. And a lot of that creative use of asset comes in, how can we reuse this? What ways can we use it so that it feels different, right? So that it doesn't feel like, we're treading the same territory over and over and over again. Is that just a texture? Is it kind of changing how we think about using assets, how we rotate things, what collections of them we use together? Like Umbar Moak was built using, a lot of Umbar stuff, some stuff from the Barrow Downs, and some like Gondorian ruin stuff. And we're able to achieve a lot of variety in what we had in those space just by, new ways of using assets, as well as finding ways to, get color variations, texture variations in, because those are generally a little bit less heavy when it comes to implementation than creating full-on new asset sets. Orion could just watch the stream instead of trying to follow me around on the server. All right. Another question, another comment. My sister told me to ask you to push wedding band rings ideas back into Lotro meetings so that she can marry her husband in game. I actually like the take that Sauron's fall doesn't mean a total collapse of evil forces, but it turns into a struggle of dominance, and his lieutenants have their own agendas. Yeah, and I think like everyone has their own agendas in a game like this. Any bigger player has their own agendas. Like, you even look at Wormtongue. Like, he had his own things that he wanted to do, while doing his other nefarious stuff, right? So, and I think there's a lot to play with there. I think, and as long as we like successfully show that, those agendas feel like outgrowths of those characters, right? All right, we are almost to the Beacon Hills, and I am making fast time. This is probably be one of the first times in a while where I've gotten through what I said I was going to get through before time was up. Don't want to jinx it, but so talking more about, sympathizing with people that might have previously been villains. Someone says, Umbar did that pretty well. I almost like Koltek by now. I kind of like the rivalries that are showing up in amongst the kindred of the coin right now, too. How they, they're in a situation where they're all, working together, but again, they have their own agendas. Question, do you remember back in Lotro Mirkwood, before it was public, a whole server of players trying to get into Mirkwood and crash the server, like hundreds of people trying to swim into Mirkwood from Lorien? I don't remember that. It doesn't shock me, though I'm not sure why it might have crashed the server, unless they were getting into something that they shouldn't have been getting into. But I don't recall that event specifically. Any hopes that one day we'll be able to resize housing items ourselves? Asking for a friend. As far as resizing goes, I do have I have a number of basically engineering heavy tasks for things that I would love to see happen to Lotro housing or for Lotro housing. And it's a matter of time. We're currently waging our battles on performance improvements. And I think those are very important things for us to tackle. After that, who knows what's next on everyone's plate. I certainly have a short list of things that are my priorities when it comes to asking for support with the housing system. And Orion, since he's in here, and I have kind of long game plans for the housing system that are definitely going to need engineering support. Things like scaling, things like unlocking other rotation axes, things like, for decorative walls, I'd really like to not have to create new permutations of those things every time we have a new texture that we want to offer for decorative walls. I'd really prefer to find a way to make a single blank decorative wall that you can apply a surface and a color to on your own. So those sorts of things are certainly stuff that I'm thinking about. Even doing things like adding new sliders to wall and surface stuff that will let you adjust the scale and positioning of wall and floor surface textures, for example. I would love to see that as well. But it's time, it's work, it's effort. Housing, question mark. I wish larger hooks worked like containers for smaller decorative items, or for smaller hooks. So we did investigate a little bit a long time ago about the idea of slotted housing items, where you could have, for example, a table that could have X number of slots in it, and then you can slot in other smaller things into it to create an arrangement, and then you only have to use one hook to create your settings. I think in initial investigation for that, probably pretty prohibitive. I wouldn't anticipate that specifically becoming available, but and I think our approach now of doing the consolidated items will help scratch some of that itch. It won't solve the specific thing that you're asking about, but it should help other aspects in a similar way. So I have a doorbell housing item, but no outdoor hooks for it. Yes, there was actually a specific patch note that went in. I think it was for 40 or 40.1. That item's been renamed. It's just, excuse me, hanging bell. So it's no longer a doorbell. So hopefully that eliminates confusion about that. The level of effort of making placing just a single hook specifically for that one item, would have been a lot of work to basically just allow people to hang a doorbell. So we felt it was an easier, not as satisfying, but an easier change to just change the name of the item. Sometimes in game development, you have to go with the decision that makes the most sense, even if it is the least satisfying of your options. All right, where am I now? All right. Whee! As I recklessly run off of every single ledge I find, making Orion's life difficult as he's trying to follow me. I feel like that should just be the stream now. It's like, how to make the invisible Orion have a hard time following me around. Well, so you joke about a buddy cop movie, but Orion and I have been talking about doing a stream together, like a regular stream, kind of like our, like a casual stroll, but with Orion in scenario. Maybe less casually strolling and more talking about what goes into and what went into making the original game and what goes into making it now. We have not solidified all of our thoughts on that yet, but all right. I'm out of the woods. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, music is such a big part of the world of Middle Earth. It's actually one of the things that just has been popping into my head is like I very clearly remember the music that I was listening to when I was building the original Arid Luin landscape, and then thinking about like what music am I listening to now, like as my like shut down brain focus on landscape music while building update 42, building what we're building now. And it's interesting to me how the music I was listening to there was a lot of like lyrics to it, whereas the stuff I'm listening to now is just all like, honestly, it's Tron Legacy and the various soundtracks from Supergiant games, things like Bastion and Transistor and Hades. I've playing Hades 2, so I'm staying away from the Hades 2 soundtrack until I've had my fill of the game before I go into the soundtrack side of it. But all right. Are there any hidden or unfinished spaces in these regions? The earlier streams regions had quite a lot of them, but since then we've barely seen any of them. So, I think there are certainly lots of foothills and whatnot that aren't accessible to players in these areas. Again, I think there was just a philosophical focus on getting players from point A to point B in the game, in the story. And so there's not a lot of focus on just like wander space. That said, while there's lots of like stuff built up into the impassables that can't be reached, those are great opportunities for, in the future, if we ever decide to add a little bit more here and there or do a filler zone. So for example, like say we wanted a White Mountains zone, like there's probably space up in this area here to do those sorts of things. Running. And then another says, so you're the one who put all those unreachable areas near the actual Arid Luin map. So Arid Luin is the original game, Middle Earth Online. There were a lot of things built for that. And that meant that when we kind of pivoted to Lord of the Rings Online for Middle Earth Online, while we kept kind of the same height map and places, a lot of them just weren't needed anymore for the direction of what we were building. So there are all of these little villages and points of interests that are just kind of stuffed around all over the place in those original areas that have just been forgotten about because they're not the focus of the game anymore. And they're things that, every so often we'll go through and we'll start like working in those out of bounds areas for purposes, and rediscover things. When I was building Cardaswan, the boundary, south of the Lonelands, there were actually a bunch of like little old camps and villages and whatnot kind of in that whole area because those were at one point populated. Populated, I speak in very loose terms when I say populated. Populated in the sense that it might have been a couple of buildings and a teleport location meant to be a stable master, that sort of thing. But they were placed. And so it was just kind of like funny to discover those when we built the Old Forest extension in Cardalon. Like there were things that we kind of discovered hiding underneath the map that were like a little surprising to run into. So yeah, there's lots of those little things kicking around. There's stuff around the Shire. There's stuff around the North Downs. Like all of that stuff is up in there. Speaking of Middle Earth Online, there was a Grey Havens built in it. Pics are still available on the internet. Is it something you still have saved somewhere? I'm not sure what the status of those locations are. If they, like many of those places, if they still exist, they are nowhere near our standards for visuals, for world design, for content design, any of that. So even if they still exist, I would not anticipate them to be particularly usable for anything. All right, we are almost done with our tour. I'm gonna cheat a little bit to get to my final destination. Spooky spires. When this region was developed, was it all bright and sunny, then you got dark with adding the day file? Can you change the day file to show this landscape during a sunny day for a moment, perhaps? So usually whenever we start a region, we pick a default day file for it. It's usually whatever the adjacent day file for that region is. Sometimes it's Breland default, the default Breland day file. Sometimes it's we have one that's called World Builder only, which is the default day file that our tools use. And that's when we start doing work on it. And then as we continue in development, then we'll kind of determine what our day file for that region is going to be and set it up. There is a way that I can do that in client. Unfortunately, I don't remember the file names that I would need to use to set it to like a default Breland day file. So I'm not able to do that. Maybe next stream, if we're still in dark and dank places, we can go to Mordor, and then I can change Mordor to use the Shire day files. You'll see Mordor in a whole new light. And he shall not pass. Sorry, I know that's not Gandalf. He looks a little Gandalf-y in that pose. All right, well, I'm gonna park it here and get a good view and take a look and see if there are any other questions that people have. And let's set there we go. So it's a little bit brighter and happier, right? So yeah, we've got a couple minutes left. Are there any other questions that anyone has before we call it? Otherwise, I think we can wrap up. So we are doing this stream now monthly, the first Wednesday of every month. I think actually July I'm going to have to reschedule it because of the 4th of July holiday, and I'm going away on vacation. But after that, we should be back onto a regular schedule, first Wednesday of every month. Continuing on through how we've been going. So our next area will likely be, let's see, boop, boop. Probably head to the wastes and run around up through here. I don't think we've gone to the Dead Marshes either, so maybe next one we'll do the Wastes and Dead Marshes. More brown lands, hooray. And then after that, we'll be heading into Mordor. Mordor is big enough that this will probably be a multi-day stream or multi-stream thing, where we'll do, Udun, probably Udun and Doromarth maybe. Cover those two in one, and then do Talathungal and the rest after that. But yeah, so thank you everyone for attending the stream. Always happy to run through Middle-earth with you all. Update 40.1 just went out. I know we've got Bull Roar plans coming up soon too for Update 41 previews, including the hardtack of Thorin's Hall, which is Orion's new crafting event. And I think yeah. All right, everyone. You have a great afternoon. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you in game.